With that, I now want to introduce our next speaker. He's a highly accomplished attorney, over 20 years as an attorney. He's helped many of my friends in the areas of this Islamic wills and estate planning. Went to school, San Diego State, and then law school at Indiana University. For the last couple of years, he's been a partner at a firm called Bohm, Wildish, and Matsen LLP. He's based in beautiful Southern California, very active in the community there. Without further ado, let's bring up Brother Ahmed Sheikh.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, my name is Ahmed Sheikh. I am, thank you very much for that kind introduction. So about me, just a little bit, I do estate planning. So estate planning, people come to a realization at some point in their life that they're not going to be here forever. They can't take their stuff with them when they go. And there are people that they love and they care about and they want to do right by them, right? They have children, they have a responsibility to their children, they have a spouse, maybe that they have a responsibility to, maybe parents, these types of people. And then there's also the possibility that even if you don't pass away, sometimes people lose their executive decision-making ability. What that means is that there are people out there, and you might have met some of these people that are walking, talking, telling jokes. They might be wise. They might be people that you go to for advice on things. But if they got an email or a WhatsApp message from a Nigerian prince or something, they might actually give their bank account number and they might not have done it a year or so before. And that is what we refer to as executive decision making. And so there's something called a conservatorship that people would like to avoid and make sure that they they maintain their dignity and their privacy for their family as well. This is kind of like, then there's guardianship. People want to make sure that they name guardians for their minor children in the event that they can't raise their children themselves. They need to make healthcare decisions so if they can't make healthcare decisions for themselves, they have a process to appoint people to do that. So this is the sort of baseline. I'm a responsible adult and I want to do responsible adult things, right? And a lot of people haven't gotten to that stage yet. A lot of people would rather not think about these things until much later, but that later eventually does come. And sometimes it doesn't, and then there's kind of a mess that might occur after death or in the event of incapacity. And so the idea here is to make sure and have some sort of a plan. Now there are other things in estate planning. And so estate planning is a field of law that encompasses just a very broad area of things, including tax planning. That includes things like charitable planning. So people who want to create things like charitable remainder trusts or lead trusts or different types of charitable vehicles and planning, asset protection planning. There are a number of exemptions under the law that will protect people's assets in the event of things like lawsuits. And there are, of course, structures that people can legally create as well that might have varying degrees of success if you are actually sued or you go bankrupt. And so this is a little bit different in that, if some sort of legal disaster strikes later on, if something really, really bad happens where somebody sues you and wins a lawsuit that takes away all of your money, well, can you still have some money left? Can you still be able to retire? Can you still leave something for your family members, even if something horrible like that happens? And there are provisions in the law that might allow for that to occur. And so that's in a nutshell what it is that I do. I'm a board certified specialist in estate planning, trust, and probate by the California Bar. I have that's been the case for about 14 years. I've practiced law for about it's like my 24th year now doing this, and I've had many clients within the Muslim community who want to plan based on the Islamic rules of inheritance. Now, what is that? In Islam, you can't do whatever it is that you want. Now that should be pretty obvious, right? We can't do haram things. We have to give our we can't just hoard money. We have to give in zakah. We have to give zakah. But what happens is that after you pass away, inheritance is too important of a thing that can be left to your own vanity and to your own desires. And so in the Quran, Allah has specifically ordained inheritance. And so there is this system of inheritance that is a right. And so when your child gets inheritance, when your son gets inheritance, when your daughter gets inheritance, when your father, your mother gets inheritance, it is literally a God-given right, because Allah has ordained in the Quran that this is the share of inheritance and this is what it's supposed to be. Now, the system that we have here, where I practice in California, I practice in Texas and elsewhere, and the system is that it's my money. I can do with it as I please. And there is a lot of support for that in American law. The notion that you can do whatever it is that you want, that's essential to the nature of property. But in Islam, that is not an essential nature of property. Property is entrusted to you. It is not yours. So we actually know this in like Ayatul Kursi and several other places in the Quran, that everything that is in the heavens and the earth is belongs to Allah, right? And so whatever it is that we have has been entrusted. And so this is the notion that where we come from, where we can't just do whatever it is that we feel like. We have to make sure and pass it along based on the Islamic rules of inheritance. Now, how do we do that? So one of them is, and this is something that many of you might be somewhat familiar with. There are documents that are known as wills, and there's another one referred to as a living trust, or what is known as a revocable living trust. These are all pieces of paper with stuff written on it. What's important isn't that you have a will, and what is important isn't that you have a trust. What is vitally important is that the documents that you create accomplish what you want for them to accomplish. And so one of those things, of course, is that your values. If you are Muslim, it's fard for Muslims um, to make sure that that the inheritance is distributed pursuant to the Islamic rules of inheritance. I should also point out, and there's going to be some questions about this because a lot of people are familiar with the Islamic rules of inheritance, that the Islamic rules of inheritance is not exactly the same thing as estate planning. Estate planning is about organizing your assets, assets that you have now, assets that you're gifting, assets that you're giving away in charity. Your tax planning, things like that. That is not the same thing as inheritance. Inheritance is, I have stuff, I die, and this is who that stuff goes to, right? That is essentially what is inheritance, not necessarily how you organize things. And sometimes people will have fairly complex structures that involve their family before they pass away. Sometimes it's not especially complex, but or it might be fairly easy to understand. But they're organizing their affairs in particular ways. Now we have in California a system referred to as community property. Community property is a system that is not inheritance. So sometimes people will wonder, well, wait a minute, under the Islamic rules of inheritance, and I only have a limited amount of time, so I didn't go into shares. If you have questions about these things, I'd be happy to answer them as we go along. Or actually towards the end, however it is that that Brother Tanvir wants to do it.
Actually, there are a couple of questions, Brother Ahmed. Yeah, so
Okay,
just leave some time in the end. All right. Yeah.
I will. That's totally fine. Um, so there's as far as the living trusts go, it's or any type of a trust, it's a contract. It's a contract between three different types of people. The first is the grantor, the person who creates this trust in the first place. And this is going to be like, I'm mentioning this just because this is kind of the basics of how estate planning works, even if it's complex or it's very simple and you're just doing a revocable living trust. It's going to be the grantor is the person who creates this. And then the grantor gives their property to a trustee who manages the property or the assets, um, and does so for the benefit of a beneficiary. And the beneficiary is the whole reason this arrangement exists in the first place. Now, the trustee, the grantor, and the beneficiary in most situations where you're doing a revocable living trust, which is how most people are going to do their inheritance planning, is going to be the same person. So the same person is the grantor, the trustee, the beneficiary. Now, when that person passes away, because he can't take it with him, he's going to name a successor trustee. He's going to also name successor beneficiaries. And those beneficiaries are going to be the people who are entitled to inheritance in Islam. They don't get to decide who those people are, and what the percentages are. If you're doing it based on the Islamic rules of inheritance, it is ordained by Allah who gets what. That's in the Quran and Surah Nisa. That's how inheritance is supposed to be distributed. Now, of course, it gets a little bit more complex than that. There are, of course, many books, and there's a lot of fiqh that goes that is behind it in many situations. But in a lot of situations, if you have like a family where you have like maybe you have parents, kids, a spouse, you're a Muslim family, it's actually not very complicated, and there isn't going to be a lot of disagreement in a lot of those cases as to how the inheritance is going to be distributed. There might not be any disagreement in the vast majority of the cases that I see. Now, of course, there's a little bit of a bias here because I only see what I see, and I tend to see families that are Muslim families, that don't have a lot of complexity, in terms of, but sometimes, of course, those do come around, and I've seen those as well. But for the most part, it's going to be pretty non-controversial as to who gets what. Now, there's going to be a division. You do have some discretion, and there's something called a wasiyah. A wasiyah is up to 1/3 of your estate can be distributed to a beneficial cause or a beneficial purpose. That wasiyah cannot be used for the benefit of people who are already entitled to inheritance in Islam. Um, that's the general rule. And there's a hadith about that issue as well. And so you cannot give anybody the wasiyah, who is already entitled to inheritance. So no children, no parents, no spouse. Now, of course, the wasiyah can be used for non-Muslims. And so a lot of people have non-Muslim family members, and so the wasiyah is often used for them. Um, the other thing is the last will and testament. It's typically used as a backup, though it can be used for the same purpose as a living trust. It's just that in certain states like California, almost nobody does it that way because it's dramatically more expensive because of probate. Um, I would recommend, even in places like, say, for example, Texas, where probate is not that expensive and maybe not that big of a deal, that you still do it based on a living trust, and that is because the living trust follows contract principles, and it has its own internal structure and logic that does not require judicial supervision. So depending on how it is drafted, there needs to be a way to address problems that might arise that you might not have anticipated. So when you're planning your estate, remember, you are planning for a world where you do not exist, and the circumstances of the people that you leave behind, like who's rich, who's poor, who's sick, who has a gambling problem, who has special needs. You don't have any idea about any of these things. Now, you might know what the circumstances of the people are that you love, right, and your family members. You might know that right now, and you need to be able to figure those things out based on what it is that you know. But there's going to be certain types of flexibility that's going to be required. And a judge in California or any state in the United States is incompetent to interpret Sharia. One really important thing to consider is, well, what happens if, say, for example, you have a couple of parents and a few children and a spouse, and you do a living trust, and you make sure that all of the shares are done correctly in your living trust based on the Islamic rules of inheritance, and then a parent passes away, and then you pass away like a few days later, or a few weeks later, and you didn't get a chance to call your lawyer, and change the plan. You just didn't. That just didn't happen. And so the shares that you have in your plan are just wrong. They're just wrong because, well, you didn't account for somebody passing away, or maybe somebody else was born. Those types of things happen, and so you need to be able to have a system to make modifications and do it without going to a judge. There are other ways under the probate code, especially like in my state, but I believe that that's also the case in just about every other state, that even if you have a really well drafted Islamic will, that a judge could simply ignore it. And not only can they ignore it, there are circumstances where they may be obligated to ignore it. And so you do want to make sure that you have a living trust that is privately administered, and that there is a way to deal with problems that go outside of the judicial process. Now, it is, of course, it is enforceable if there's some sort of a dispute or something along those lines. It might actually go to court, but normally if you do things based on the Islamic rules of inheritance, sometimes people ask about this as well. Well, what happens if somebody challenges it? Well, my daughter's getting less. Can she just challenge it based on getting less? Hopefully that won't happen. Normally people understand that, okay, this is a believing Muslim. They followed it based on the Islamic rules of inheritance, and it is what it is, right? Now, the only way that something like this can be challenged is if there is an issue with respect to capacity, right? The person did not have the ability to make a decision about who to give what to, because they were incapacitated, or there's fraud, duress, menace, undue influence, basically elder abuse. So, and there are certain types of situations where elder abuse might take place, and that could also change things as well with respect to how the decisions people make on inheritance. The vast majority of the time that does not happen, and if you are just simply following your own values, your own religion, then there really wouldn't be any kind of a problem with respect to that. How am I doing on time? Can I talk a bit about asset protection, or should I just take the questions now, Brother Tanvir?
We have three questions, so just leave some time for that as of now. So yeah, it'll be nice if we can quickly touch base on asset protection.
Okay, that's fine. So the other because it was part of the title, I wanted to make sure and address asset protection as well. There are a number of situations where people should be concerned about protecting their assets. There are people who are in high liability types of professions, or they might have small businesses, they might have large businesses, whatever the case may be. There is often the possibility, whenever you interact with other people and you conduct business with people, or you have whatever, and it's just the nature of human interaction, that there are conflicts that occur from time to time. And in just about every type of situation, they're often just unexpected, right? A lot of times people don't expect that they're going to get sued. Many times when they are sued, they think they're going to win, or they have a really good case, and then they find out that they lost, and they lost big. That just happens to an enormous number of people. And so what you want to do, especially if you're going to have a plan in place and you want to be able to retire, you want to be able to have some sort of a nest egg, you want to be able to have some wealth for yourself and for your family, it is important that you might consider protecting it. And there are provisions within the law that would allow for you to do that. In the event of lawsuits or even bankruptcy, the assets might still be made available for you, so that you can still benefit and use them. And if a creditor wants to take assets away from you, when I say a creditor, I mean a judgment creditor wants to take those assets away from you because he won a lawsuit against you, they cannot have it. And that is protected under the law. There are a number of exemptions that exist in my state and California under California law that will protect specific types of assets from judgment. And some of them you might be familiar with, some of them you might not be. So, some of the things you might not need a lawyer to create a structure for. So, you might have your Social Security. You might need to, if you have a if you got a personal injury, a personal injury, if you had a personal injury lawsuit and you got some money from that, that could actually be protected from lawsuits as well. You have to actually you have to do that, right? There's the possibility of private retirement plans, and that has to be structured. Private retirement plans is a really important part of the law here in California. As far as I know, that does not exist in any other state in the United States, but it could protect an enormous amount of wealth in California. Other states have other ways of doing it. For example, there are domestic asset protection trusts where a person can be the beneficiary of a trust. And they'll put it in a trust where somebody else is the trustee. It's based on state law in another state. There is an issue there with respect to the federal bankruptcy law. If you just keep it there for 10 years, then or within 10 years, federal bankruptcy law can claw that back. So if you have that for 10 years or more, then and then you get sued later on, and maybe you file for bankruptcy, the assets are going to be much better protected. In some instances, we also create asset protection trusts offshore in the let's say places like the Cook Islands or Nevis, which are jurisdictions that allow for pretty strong asset protection. Those are exceptional and they can be a bit expensive. The more common way that people are maybe more familiar with asset protection is things like limited liability companies or corporations. So if you have a business, you might be somewhat familiar with how that works. If you're sued for something that has to do with the business that you operate, as long as it's not personal, it's not something that you did personally, then the risk that you have is the business itself. You can lose the business if you have a building, if you have some sort of a rental property or something like that in a limited liability company. If you don't have a limited liability company and a tenant or a maintenance person or somebody sues you, then your personal assets, your bank account, your house, those types of things can be subject to just being taken away from you. So they can be subject to attachment by a judgment creditor. There is also a thing called a homestead exemption. California has a homestead exemption that this year in 2024 is a hair under $700,000. So if you have equity in your home of around $700,000, your home is protected. Other states have much more generous homestead exemptions. I believe Texas and Florida have homestead exemptions that go to acreage. As I recall, in Texas, it's about 200. I mean, it's 20 acres or maybe 10 acres in the city, if I'm not mistaken, and 200 acres in the countryside. So you should know what your exemptions are. You should know how your assets are organized when you're doing your planning. Even if you're not doing anything especially exotic, you want to make sure and organize your assets in a way that is optimized for protecting your assets in the event of a lawsuit. And so that's an important part. That's an important part of asset protection as well. So anyway, I know that I kind of I said a lot of things that I can talk about for several hours for a bunch of these subjects, but we do have a limited amount of time, and I want to get to those questions.
Yeah, so there's a two-part question, Brother Ahmed. First is what percentage of your clients are Muslim, and then do you handle the zakat part for individuals, and then do you handle zakat for Muslim nonprofits?
Yeah. So One of the things that so historically, I've been a solo practice attorney for, I used to work at a firm before, and I was a solo practice attorney for maybe about 17 years. I'd say that the vast majority of my estate planning clients, which is the majority of my clients, were Muslim. I did some litigation as well. And my litigation clients tended to be non-Muslim. That's estate litigation, like brothers suing brothers and sisters suing sisters, that type of thing. I don't currently do litigation, but I'm at this other, I'm at this other firm now, where I took over a practice, as well, and have had, just a steady stream of clients. Maybe about half to 60% of my clients these days, are Muslim. But I do, so one of the things I did do is I did work, I do a lot with the Islamic rules of inheritance. One of the things that I didn't point out, let's see if I have that here. I have a book on the Islamic rules of inheritance. It's right here. This is, so it's published by the American Bar Association. It's written with Brother Yasser Ali, who's a attorney in Arizona that I collaborated with, and it's a practice guide for how to do estate planning within the Muslim community, or for Muslims, based on the Islamic rules of inheritance. So it's a practice guide that's published by the American Bar Association. That was published in about 2019. So an enormous amount of my effort has been to um, develop a structure for inheritance based on the Islamic rules of inheritance. So yeah, I've had well over 1,000 Muslim clients over the course of these several years. And I've had to think about a lot of issues. So like one of the issues that a lot of people are concerned with is, well, if the surviving spouse gets 1/8 of inheritance, but the house is worth, 80-90% of our estate, how what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to sell the house, and make the surviving spouse live under a bridge? What do we do, right? And so a lot of the thought goes into those types of concerns that people have, because you're not just concerned about who gets what in terms of inheritance, but it's normal for people to think about, well, where am I going to live and what am I going to live on? How are we going to deal with this? How are we going to deal with conflict, right? When a person passes away, like a father passes away, it's a really, really big deal, with any family, of course. And it often brings out the best in people. Sometimes it brings out the worst in people. Sometimes it brings out both, right? And you need to make sure and have a plan and have a process that gives people want to be respected, they want to be heard. And more than tax planning, um, I mean, I should say families are far more complex than tax law is, or any law is, really. And when disaster happens, it often happens within the way families operate. And at the very least, you don't want to have a plan that facilitates dysfunction. And so that's another part of, well, I can just go on about that issue. But yeah, I don't know if I even answered the question. Did I?
I want to we'll take another one. This is a bit wordy from Sister Reshma.
Yeah.
I just have to scroll it up here. Oh,
Uh-huh.
okay. Oops. My screen's acting weird on me now. Man, this is my bad.
That's all right. I actually can't see any questions myself.
Yeah,
Would I be able to? Or they're just DM to you?
yeah, this coming to me, which I don't know what I did with the settings, so I will fix that for the future. But it's all coming to me.
Okay.
I'd have preferred everyone sees it, but yeah, okay. Your Sister Reshma's question is a bit wordy. How Islamic is the estate planning in the U.S.? I'm an executor for an estate of a Muslim deceased person whose financial accounts are still in the deceased person's name as estate. Is this an Islamically approved structure? The financial brokerage or banks refuse to transfer funds and prefer the executor structure under estate account. Some tax benefits for inheritors are the reason to keep assets under estate account. Please clarify if an estate account is Islamic.
Well, the thing that you need to do with the estate account is itself, it's just an account, right? So when somebody passes away, it can't be in their own name because they're gone and they can't take it, with them. And so it belongs to their estate, and then the estate needs to be administered. So when you have an estate, what needs to happen is that the executor or the successor trustee will need to gather the estate, pay off any debts, and distribute everything based on the instructions provided by the decedent, or under state law if a person didn't provide, if the decedent didn't provide the instructions, meaning like they didn't have a will or something, or a beneficiary designation form if it's a retirement account or something along those lines. And so whether it's Islamic or not depends on those instructions. So in the Quran, of course, there's a necessity to pay off debts, pay the wasiyah, meaning the discretionary bequest that an individual has, and then after that make distribution. There's also accounting that goes on in there. There's going to be stuff within state law that's going to be required, like providing notice to beneficiaries, potential beneficiaries, to creditors, potential creditors. There's going to be different rules in state law as to how that's supposed to occur, whether you're supposed to notify the court, whether you're supposed to notify the state attorney general, which might have to happen sometimes, or the Social Security or administration, or Medi-Cal, or the Medicaid agency, or there might be a number of different types of things that will need to occur as part of an estate administration. The account itself is just an account. What matters is how it's administered and what the instructions were. If a person has instructions that are unjust, that give it to one person, right? Then there would be that would be a problem. I had one person, like an elderly person, come over to me. This actually happened multiple times, where he just became a widower. What happens with widowers a lot of the times is that they normally want to get remarried, like really, really fast, right? They normally almost no matter how old they are, they usually want to get remarried within a year and a half, something like that. Now this person wanted to get remarried very, very quickly. He met somebody a month later. He wants to marry this person, but he wants to marry this person without actually telling his adult children. He wants to do this in secret, and he wants to give her a whole bunch of property, immediately, that would have belonged to his wife, his late wife. And a lot of my conversation was just trying to convince him that this is just a horrible idea and it's going to end badly. But that's just part of what I do, and I went on a tangent. So go on. Was there another question?
Hey, in the interest of time, there's one other question which I will message you if you can just hang in there. I want to bring up the next speakers. I'll message you. You respond. I'll post the Q&A. All right. We'll do that.
Jazakallah khair. If anybody has any interest in Islamic inheritance, I have a website, islamicinheritance.com. Check it out. I have an enormous number of articles there, and you can subscribe to my email list there. So.
Are you okay sharing your email, or just the website is good enough?
No, the website's fine, but my email is Sheikh. Well, you know my email, ashaikh@bohmwildish.com.
I'll put it up. I'll put it up on the chat. I'll put it up on the chat.
Okay. Very good.
Brother Ahmed Sheikh, yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it, and inshallah we'll be in touch. All right.
It's a pleasure. I hope it was beneficial.
It definitely was. Jazakallah. All right.